Welcome to another segment of Purple Brainstorm. I am your host, Amelia, and today we're going to be talking about the dark history of disability. And by that, I mean we're going to take a look at how far we as a group of people with disabilities have come and look at how our life is now versus what our life would have been like, say, if we were born in the 1950s and 1960s. So let's get started. Our life today looks very different from life back in the 50s and 60s. We now have laws and legislation that protect people with disabilities, that help level the playing field for equal opportunity and for us to be in school, for us to have equal access to things such as education, such as jobs, healthcare, quite a few. We didn't always have those. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is correct. You heard me. We did not have those. In fact, the laws that gave us those rights are actually still in their infancy compared to other laws and statutes that have been written into our legislation. The ADA, which was enacted and written into law July 26, 1990, and our 504 and 503 of the Rehabilitation Act, which grant accommodations and such things as health and tools for people with special, such as accommodations for people in education from K through 12, also into our job field, to our secondary education and higher education. So with that being said, we're going to look at what life would have been like growing up now, whereas life growing up what life growing up would have been like back in the 1950s and 60s. And here are two key differences. One, our quality of life and our access to things. People with disabilities, imagine being born in the 60s and being told that your child has a disability, that your child, that they have a physical or they have a mental handicap. And the politically correct terms that were used back then were physical retardation and mental retardation. Yes, people with disabilities were called retarded. I do not like that term, personally. But I digress. People who were considered mentally retarded, and those were even individuals such as myself who had disability, who had autism, cerebral palsy, who had polio, any type of learning disability, physical, mental handicap, you were put in an institution. What mental hospitals were back in the 1950s and 60s are what prisons are today. They are filled to their maximum capacity, they are overfilled, and you could be put in them for any minute little thing that does not fit the norm. That's what a mental hospital. Some of you may be familiar with a case study or a scandal that took back in the 1950s called Willowbrook. For those of you who are familiar with the such term of Willowbrook, and those of you who are not, let me give you a recap. Willowbrook was a mental hospital, a state mental hospital, but they called it a state mental school. And it wasn't a school, but that's a place where your people with mental handicaps, physical handicaps, anybody with a disability was dropped off by everyone and their mother and left at ages. Yes, doctors and teachers were telling parents that their child would not have a quality of life, that their child would never amount to anything, that their child is just better to give them up and not even worry about them. And parents would listen, and they would drop their children off at any age and at these places. And some were never saw their parents or their families ever again. Some of them, their families came to visit them. Some of them, their families were actively involved. Some of them were not so actively involved. And with that being said, with such places as Willowbrook, people with disabilities weren't kept at home. They weren't raised. They were somebody else's problem. It was the family's dirty little secret. Willowbrook became part of a scandal in the early 70s when a young investigator named Greg Geraldo Rivera went undercover to investigate Willowbrook and found individuals of various ages living in filth, living in squalor, living in their own filth, teeth missing, broken bones. People in these institutions everyone in these institutions had hepatitis C, had infections, had broken bones, had teeth missing. The conditions were described as deplorable, and as well as some of these mental hospitals, and to give you an insight of them, they had occupations of patients up to 5,000. The patient to doctor or staff ratio was you had four staff, doctors, nurses, staff team to 70 to 80 patients. Today that would not pass state regulations. That would not be okay with. It would not pass your state health inspection. It would be a violation and your state code would get shut down. But back in the 1950s and 60s, people didn't care. As long as you were out of sight, out of mind, people didn't have to talk about you. You didn't matter is the bottom line. If you were a person with disability, you didn't matter. And I know that some of you are going to have a discussion with me about that and argue, and that's fine. But let's get back on track. Geraldo Rivera went undercover with Willowbrook and blew the whistle, and there was a 2020 segment on Willowbrook that blew the whistle on what life was like in these institutions and these state hospitals. Described as deplorable, as you could smell feces, that you could, walking on the sidewalk, you would hear screams. And for those of you interested in this case study or this segment, you can go to I will attach the link after the segment in our comments page in the description area for you to watch the documentary called The Unforgotten. And that is 25 years after Willowbrook. Yes, these patients and these people who were in this documentary are still alive. But for us to continue, patients were abused and neglected. Staff would be hitting and physical, there would be emotional trauma taking place. Patients would have to share, there would be 15 patients to one bathroom. Now, in a place of 5,000 that maybe had 10, 12 bathrooms, and you have 70 to 80 patients using one of these bathrooms, you can imagine the stench. But not only that, diseases that were spread, that patients who had broken bones, who caught hepatitis C, who had some patients would have their teeth extracted to prevent them from biting other patients, from biting themselves, and from biting staff. Today, that would be seen as inhumane. There would have been other precautions taken. And to keep in mind, back in the 50s and 60s, doctors did not know the difference between physical retardation and mental retardation. Believe it or not, in the past 50, 60 years, you may think we've come a long way, but there's still a lot of work to be done. But the reason why I bring up Willowbrook is because it leads me to my next point. In 1965, Robert F. Kennedy called Willowbrook a snake pit. He called for an overhaul of what was the disability system at the time. He said that actions needed to be taken, that there needs to be a discussion of better implementation, better care, better policies to take care of people with disabilities, and more funding to go into research to research these conditions and to build a better lifestyle and a better system for people with disabilities. So that being said, because of those who raised their voices and who fought for individuals such as myself back in the 60s and 70s, is why we are where we're at now, is why there is a bit, quality of life is better for individuals with disabilities now compared to what individuals with disabilities life, their quality of life was like when, if their childhood was to take place in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And which brings me to our next topic of discussion. If not for the 88 Act, the Rehabilitation Act, which is also our 504 and our 503, I would not have the quality of life that I have. I would not have been able to achieve the success that I have. I would not have been able to gain, I would not have been seen as an equal. Let's just put it that way. To watered down version, I would not be seen as an equal to my other counterparts. So yes, you can say that, oh, well, your quality of life is better, your quality of this is better, oh, it's been years. And the reason why I bring this up is because when having discussions with people about life with disability, you talk to me like you guys talk to people of color about when it comes to topics like slavery or civil rights, when you don't even know your own history. And yes, there are some of you that I'm calling out specifically. You want to talk to me about how I should be grateful about the quality of life that I have now, when yes, I am a quality of life, but yet you yourself fail to realize that I still do not have the equal, I'm still not same rights as you do if you are able-bodied. If you're basically male, able-bodied, financial means, there's a lot of things that I can name up, but basically I'm just going to say, if you are part of the majority and not the minority, you are not a member of some marginalized group, yeah, I'm talking to you. Because marginalized groups, such as people of color, people with disabilities, have had to fight for their rights, for their civil rights, their civil liberties, to be seen as equals, to be seen as an equal to you. We will have the same education, the same merit, same character, but because of one sliver, one little thing that separates us from us against them, we have had to fight for equality. Now, to get on a topic, I fight for equity. There is a difference between fighting for equality and fighting for equity. I fight for equity, so that way it's an equal level playing field. Fighting for equality is fighting for to have the same rights as everybody else, such as access to education, such as access to jobs, the same, like the right to marry, equality in that sense. Whereas fighting for equity is fighting to be able to complete those things, to achieve those things, to have equally gain those things. And what I mean by equity is to be seen as equal to, say, someone like that of my roommate, or my nieces and nephews' mom, or someone who's able-bodied, to where my disability, my ethnic background, my racial background isn't brought into question. Okay, so let's talk about quality of life. Nowadays we have an option there are more options for people with disabilities when it comes to their living arrangements versus when there was the 50s and 60s. 50s and 60s and up until about the late 1980s, early 1990s, the only option is either if they stay at home, if parents chose to keep their child at home, or they chose to put them in the state mental hospital. Nowadays we have because we had people who paved the way, we had trailblazers such as families of Temple Grandins. We had people like Temple Grandin and her parents. We had people with disabilities themselves and their families speak up and say, this is not okay. We deserve better. We deserve an equal chance. This is what we deserve. We are capable of this. Because we had individuals who spoke up and gave a voice to the voiceless and were brave enough about it, they paved the way for what we have now today. But yet, we all know that history is doomed to repeat itself if people do not fight for a better life, for a better way of living, for equity. We all know that if people stop fighting, history is doomed to repeat itself. And the reason why I bring this up is because as of now, we have people with disabilities, such as myself. I live in an apartment. I live independently of that of my mother, but I have a roommate, and I choose to have a roommate. But there are individuals with disabilities who need just that little bit of help, such as getting to and from the grocery store, getting to and from doctor's appointments, or such as getting to and from work, or who help them. It's the little things. We have independent living homes, and then we also have what are called ICFID homes, which are 24-hour supervision, which work to give people a job, but also they provide a independent living arrangement for people with disabilities. They just have 24/7 supervision. And I bring up these different types of living arrangements for a reason. They provide a sense of independence, a sense of security, a sense of stability, and structure for people with disabilities. Some of which, like individuals such as myself, we can do that on our own. But then some individuals with disabilities need that little bit of help. And it doesn't mean that they're any less or any more of a person than you or I. Because within these ICFID homes, they provide structure, they provide cooking, they provide a home to people with disabilities whose parents are getting too old but are still involved in their life, or their parents gave them up for adoption, or they come from state hospitals. And the sad part about homes like these is that our legislation, our government is trying to rid of them, because that's where it ties into history is about ready to repeat itself. Our government is trying to rid of these homes because our government is starting to have this mentality that if you can go to school, if you can go to work, if you can do A, B, C, and D without, little to no help at all, well then you should be able to live on your own completely. That's not necessarily the case. With that, our government is trying to get rid of these homes. They have shut down over 200 of these homes already, which is forcing these families, the families of these individuals, to either A, if their parents are still alive, forcing families to bring them back into their homes, find other living arrangements, or it's forcing them to go back to the state hospital, which costs the families money, costs taxpayers money. It's a detriment to the individual themselves. I bring this up because It ties into our people wanting to make a change, people wanting to see better for everybody, and for those of you who like to take a back seat, and for those of you that say, well, if they want equality, well, then they should be able to do this. Well, they should be able to do this. Okay, we as people with disabilities didn't ask to be born this way. We didn't ask for this to be a part of our lives. It was given to us. It happened. Like I've said in my videos before, if I had a choice, this would not be the life I would have chosen for myself. Trust me. I wouldn't even choose having a disability on my worst enemy. We all know I have a list of those. I would not choose for anybody to experience the hardship of which living a life with disability entails. Because it takes a toll on your mental health. It takes a toll on every aspect of your life. It truly does. And none of you are going to be able to understand that unless you have a disability yourself. I'm sorry, that is just the hard truth. That is just like some of you out there, you are never going to understand what it's like to be a person of color unless, guess what? Well, you can't change the melanin in your skin. So you're not going to be able to know what it's like of what Black people go through. That's why as an activist, as a social justice activist, I stand with the Black Lives Matter movement. As a person of color and a person of color with a disability, I stand with the Black Lives Matter movement because change needs to happen. Equity needs to happen. There needs to be a sense of unity, of us coming together to build a better future for the younger generation, change what is wrong, dismantle it, and rebuild it and fix what is wrong with it. Because the hard truth for some of you that you will not be able to accept is that this world was not meant for all of us. Some of you are going to get mad at that statement, but this world was not meant for all of us. It was set up for a specific type of group of people. People of color and people in disabilities were not taken into consideration when the system was built, which is why we have had to fight relentlessly and effortlessly to have the same rights as the rest of you that are in the majority. None of you are going to be able to understand that unless you are a person of color and you are a person with disability. Unless you are a member of a marginalized group, you will never understand that concept. So for those, and another thing I want to address is some of you, which I call your behind the screens activism, your armchair activists. I see you posting stuff to social media, such as Twitter, such as Facebook, to YouTube, about articles about another person of color, another person with disability, another ethnic person who was set on fire, who was killed by police, who got assaulted, or who was raped. It floors me that you armchair activists have the gall to call yourself an activist when I see you as a person who is scared to raise their voice. Now, I'm not talking to all of you armchair activists, because there are some people that live in rural areas who aren't close to the big cities, who can't go and join out in the movements, or there are exceptions to this rule. But those of you who are getting offended by that statement, well, if the shoe fits, lace up. And those of you who are not, who are like, okay, where's this shit going with this? To you, I'm going to give you a list of ways that you can help people of color and people with disabilities. If you truly want to make a change, I will give you a list at the end of this segment of places that you can go to raise your voice, raise your concerns, join the movement and let your voice be heard, and to help us make change, to help make a better future for our youth, so that way they don't have to experience the struggles and the hardships that we've had to. Like, I don't want to, like, some of you know that I was a camp counselor. The reason I speak up and I speak out is because of them. As an adult with disability, and as an adult, as a person of color, I look at them and I think of them. It's like, do I want them to go through the hardships that I've gone through? Do I want them to face the same adversity, the same resistance that I've had to? Do I want them to be, risk of, to fear the police, to fear authority? Do I want them to walk out on the streets and be afraid that they're going to be shot dead? I don't want them to have that fear. I want to eliminate that fear for them. I want them to have hope. I want them to have faith. I want them to believe in the idea that they do have a future. That's why I raise my voice, and that is why I speak out. And to those that I am speaking to you, I stand with like I said before, I stand with the Black Lives Matter movement as a person of color and as a person with disability. Some of you cannot fathom the resistance, the judgment. You have this idea of this perfect little colored world, that it's all sunshines and rainbows, and that everything has always been equal opportunity, equal access, equal everything. I shake my head and I pity you and your ignorance and your stupidity. And yes, I do pity your stupidity. Like, I pity you so bad that I really can't find the words of why I pity you. I just pity you. I have had to fight, and here's a difference between us. I've had to fight to be seen of what my word is, to be given credibility for what comes out of my mouth and the statements that I'm making. Having a bachelor's degree, being a person with disability, a person of color with a higher ed background, helps give me some credibility and some stance. Whereas those of you in the majority who have, all you need is your high school diploma, you're going to be taken with more sincerity than what I am. So we have to fight harder to prove ourselves. So what we say can be taken with some sense of credibility versus over here. Some of you aren't going to grasp that concept, and that's okay, because I can't blame you or get mad at you for what you don't understand. But what I can get mad at you is your lack of your will to educate yourself, to inform yourself, and to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. That I can hold you accountable for. Being a minority, being a member of marginalized groups, has had its eye-opening experiences, because as I said, some of you have this idea that we have all had equal access to opportunities, equality and everything. No. That's why I don't have these discussions with a lot of people, because you fail to understand this concept and where I'm coming from, and to see my side of the conversation. I see your side of the conversation fully, but you fail to see where I'm coming from and why I'm frustrated and why I'm angry and why I continue to fight. Just like you fail to see where people of color, where African Americans, where blacks and brown folks are coming from. It's the same concept, the same idea. We all fight for one common goal. We want a future. We don't want our future to be cut short because the rug's going to get ripped out underneath us if we don't know we're going to catch a bullet from the side street, or if we're going to die due to our health problems. That's the reality of our lives and what we want you to see. And for you armchair activists, why we get frustrated, and some of you activists, not just armchair activists, but some of you activists, why we get so frustrated with you is because you like to have this idea that, oh, just by posting this article that you're being supportive, or by saying, oh, hashtag this, this, and this. We want you to be proactive instead of having a backseat view to this whole driving force. Because y'all don't want to be part of the proactive part. Y'all don't want to be the in the proactive part of it, but y'all want to have the, praise and glory at the end result. That's when y'all, swoop in and y'all want to take credit for it. While those of us who were proactive into making change don't get the recognition. But yet all you backseat drivers are on the, oh yay, and we're high-fiving and yay, we did something together. Just that. No, take several seats. Pipe it, sit it, take a seat. Please. Because our lives and what we have fought for takes a toll on us. Takes a toll on our families. It is mentally and emotionally draining when you run into ignorance daily. And why I've said in my previous segments, why is it that as a person of color and as a person with disability, I've had to go to college to educate you? Why can't you sit down and just listen, open up your ears, open up your mind, and somehow grasp what we're trying to tell you? Instead, you want to call us as, oh, we're troublemakers, we're thugs, we're criminals, we don't know what we're talking about. You want to label us as the bad guys when really we're trying to help you understand. We're trying to help make a better future for those in our own group because we don't want to see them deal with this. And so in closing of why I did this segment of the dark history of people with disabilities is for you to see that things have not always been this way, and there is still work that needs to be done. And within closing this segment, in the credits, I will give you a list of things that you can do, and I will go over those briefly. There are things that you can do if you want to be part of the solution instead of being part of the problem. There are things that you can do to help, such as going to your local legislation office, writing to them and saying, here, this needs to be addressed. This needs to be a focal point in this upcoming legislation and the fiscal year and going into the fiscal budget. Invest in education, invest in our healthcare, invest in our community, invest in our people. That's where you can make a change. If you're afraid and you don't want to be one of those because I get some of our people in military who want to speak out about this. There are some people who are still students who risk their future careers. There's a lot of individuals who they want to raise their boards, they may not know how, or they're scared to. And I get that. It's a legit fear. But there are things that you can do to help versus for you just taking the back seat and letting the rest of us pave the way. Like I said, write to your local senators, your legislatures. Tell them what your concerns are and what you want to hear. You can also tell your story to, if you have epilepsy or you have cerebral palsy, there are foundations that are set up and you can write to them and email them your story. Or if you're a parent of someone with cerebral palsy or epilepsy or autism or any type of disability, if you're a parent of a child with disability, you can write to these places and tell your story either as a parent or as a caregiver, as a spouse. You can even tell your child's story and give them a voice. That's how you can help. For those that are interested in policy and legislature, you can help in the upcoming year with letting your voice heard and helping with changing policies of what needs to be revamped, what needs to be edited, what needs to be changed, what do we need to see for a better future. That is where you can help. If you want to be right there in the fire, right at the front line of the battle. There are multiple ways that you can help. And I will make those resources available to you to give you a starting point. Otherwise, call your congressman. Tell them what your concerns are. Tell them that we need ICFID homes. Tell them we need funding to go into medical research, that we need funding to go into our educational system. We need funding to go into this. Tell them that it's important to you. Don't just take a back seat and say, well, it is what it is. Because those of you who have this mindset of, well, it is what it is, you're the problem. You are part of the problem. You are why history repeats itself. Those of you that have this mindset of, well, it is what it is, give those of us who are the driving force, who are trying to bulldoze and pave the way for people with disabilities, for people of color, for marginalized groups. It's those of you that create the roadblocks. And you continue this system of oppression, this system of us against them. You're part of the problem, not part of the solution. So in closing, I will make these resources available to you. I hope you have enjoyed this segment, and I hope that you stay tuned for more. You all have a wonderful year. Happy New Year, and stay blessed.